Hello and welcome to Africa Speaks. My name is Doreen Biira, and this week kicked off on a sad note, not with good news, of course, of the passing of African journalist Komla Dumor, and we're going to be looking at this and more on Web City. South Sudan's two negotiating teams on Friday signed a ceasefire agreement in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. However, it remains to be seen if the two conflicting factions will implement the conditions set in the agreement. The agreement comes after a month of fighting that has left thousands dead. The talks have been adjourned and are set to continue on the 7th of February 2014.
We all recall that South Sudan was born with the full support of the region and the international community at large. We also recognize that South Sudan is still a young and nascent state, which is still in the process of state building, which cannot be achieved overnight.
Africa and the world woke to shocking news of the passing of Ghanaian-born journalist Komla Dumor, a household name for anyone who followed news across the continent. On international news channel BBC, Dumor started as a traffic reporter for a local station in Accra, Ghana's capital, and a few years later did the morning show at Joy FM in Ghana. He then joined BBC in 2006, where he rose to present the African Business Report alongside hosting BBC Africa's radio show. At the time of his death, Komla Dumor was host of Focus on Africa. He died of heart attack at his home in London. And Kenya and the world is abuzz with award-winning actress Lupita Nyong'o, who starred in 12 Years a Slave. Lupita, who has earned her place in Hollywood as an actress, is also up for the Oscar Awards. And in addition to Lupita, Somalia too has gone to Hollywood. Abdi Bakad Abdi Nasir, a Somali refugee living in Minneapolis, starred in Captain Phillips. Abdi is among the nominees for the Oscar Awards for Best Supporting Actor alongside big Hollywood names. Well, there we go. It's been a week of good, bad, and ugly. Of course, the passing of Komla Dumor could have been the saddest thing that happened to us in Africa and the rest of the world. And knowing that he died at such a young age, his life had just begun at 41. Now, on Click today, we're going to keep it simple and to the point, but with a picture that sends a strong message across the continent. Take a look. On Click, we bring Africa closer in fashion. This picture symbolizes color, beauty, and the potential Africa has got to make it even bigger. All right, now welcome to the platform where we do talk issues affecting the African continent, good and bad at the same time, but also we try to pose solutions to some of these issues that we do discuss. Today we are paying attention to rebranding Africa and how best we as Africans can retell the African story. Now, a few years back, it is quite evident that the picture that was portrayed about Africa was not exactly the way it should be. The Economist ran an article that read, floods in Mozambique threats famine in Ethiopia again, and mass murder in Uganda, the implosion of Sierra Leone, and of course a string of wars across the African continent. And the new millennium has brought more disaster than hope to Africa. Worse, the few candles of hope are flickering very weakly. Now, for a brief moment in the mid-90s, the article continued to read, there were signs of improvement. World Bank figures showed a clutch of African African countries achieving economic growth rates of more than 6%, enough to lift most of their people out of poverty in years rather than, as more usually predicted, in decades. At the same time, multi-party democracy spread across the continent. A new crop of leaders emerged, and Nelson Mandela in South Africa, Yoweri Museveni in Uganda, Meles Zenawi the late in Ethiopia. Now, this new breed wanted to make life better for all their people by providing basic health care and education. They seemed to understand that peace and good government were essential. Though most of them had been socialists, they embraced the free market. Democracy and liberalization seemed to flourish, and there was talk of an African renaissance. It was an illusion, according to the article. Now, the new leaders became embroiled in wars, some with each other, and the cheerful statistics were that the result of good rains and bad accounting. Well, we can actually go on and on about the bad things that have been written about Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole, as well, has not had the best of time, except for the recent years where we are seeing a lot of innovation coming out of Sub-Saharan Africa and the rest of Africa. Now, I've got a number of guests with me in studio, and they're from across the continent. We have Aloysius Atta from Ghana, who is the CEO for Farmerline, is going to be joining us by phone link. And we also have Peter Aigega, who is Ugandan, and he's a branding expert, going to be joining us in a Google Hangout. So let's connect to Atta. Aloysius Atta, thank you so much for joining us on Africa Speaks. And I would like to know from you, what would you do if you were asked to retell the African story?
Thank you so much, Joy, for the opportunity to be on this platform. I think we as a continent, we are still very, very close to the beginning of sharing our own story. And I think telling the African story is a lifelong process. We should continue to share our story and share the story as we evolve and grow. I think we as a youth, we have a big part to play in telling this story. We have a responsibility to share this wherever we are. It could be that you are invited to a conference to speak about your company. We owe it to Africa to talk about the good things happening on the continent, because it's a surprise you that in the 21st century, people still think that Africa is a country, and we have to do a good job to talk about the innovations that are happening in the country, in the continent. Mm-hmm. We have to talk about innovations like Ushahidi, that are being used in places like Japan, in Haiti. We have to share those stories, and we have to talk both about the resources that we have, the youth, and what they are creating on the ground. How are the youth are taking upon themselves to create solutions to solve problems in their society. One big example is my company, Farmerline, where we are working with farmers. We think that's our small way of helping Africa, and also doing our part to share the story, to tell people the impact they are creating on the ground.
Right. And from your perspective, I would say that Ghana is one of the countries that has been lauded for being very democratic. But aside from the democracy story that is told about Ghana, I'm sure there's so many innovations that come out of this country. And one of them is actually yours, that is the Farmerline. So what other positivities can we look at from Ghana that can play as an example to the rest of the world and the rest of the other African countries?
One good thing is the spirit of volunteerism. We have a foundation called the Ghana Team Foundation. What we do is that we just, the youth of Ghana, we came together and we create conferences, free conferences across the country in all the 10 regions. And we just decide to train people on how to brand themselves, to train them to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves. Mm-hmm. We also have a National Volunteers Day where we mobilize youth in most communities, and they take up a social project and they all work on it for free. We all apply our talent. We range from developers, lawyers, nurses, carpenters, anybody. We just come together with what the problem in society could be. Painting a school building, it could be building a new children's park. We just put our resources together and we do it. And that's one thing I think we started last year, and we are going to be doing it every year in November. And I think that's the one thing that is very, very good, and I think that the youth in other countries in Africa should emulate.
Great. Well, just hold the line. Let's connect to our other guests that we've got online as well. We have Peter Igaga, who is a branding expert. And Peter, if you can hear me, do you think the African story has been spread out in negative light, and therefore we need to retell our own story?
Hi, Joy. How are you doing? Well, my perception of the whole African story is very simple. It's sad, because we are selling the wrong brands. What we're doing is we're selling war, we're selling poverty, we're selling disease, because that's what Africa is known for. I mean, you know, and unfortunately, in the Western world, Africa is looked at one big black hole, which is not the case. I mean, Africa has great brands. I mean, the biggest brand that ever came out of the entire world, Nelson Mandela, was an African brand. And when you look at the way Nelson Mandela built his brand, it was over time. It was he became a very focused brand, and he made it. I mean, one of our latest new brands is, of course, Lupita Nyong'o, who has gone out of her way and is doing great things. And
right.
I think even as our local media needs to now start focusing on our success stories, because we also sell our issues, you know, and that's what the world wants to consume. I think a lot of people do not know that there is that certain people take advantage of the negative energy that's put outside there, and they use it to kind of like rip the continent. So we have a duty to build a brand. There's a lot of good stuff happening, and a lot of good stuff that comes from Africa. I mean, look at Iman Cosmetics. I mean, she's one of the biggest brands in the world. I mean, she produces perfect cosmetics. Where is she from? She's a beautiful African woman. Recently, the Africa's Next Top Model, there's a Ugandan girl, Stacey Mitchell. I mean, this is a great feat. Are we talking about her enough? I don't think so. I think there's still so much more we can do. And I also believe that it's upon us as Africans to carry our flag, build Africa as a brand, make it the kind of destination that everybody wants to be and everybody wants to go and visit. And in fact, I think if you've not been to Africa, then you've missed out on a huge chunk.
Right, but do you think, Peter, if I might interject, do you think that the fact that we are having, for instance, travel limitations, we do not have per se travel unlimitedness across the African continent, do you think that is affecting the way we are meant to be retelling our story?
Yes, it does. You know, I'll tell you what, the free movement of goods and people is a very important thing. As we can see what's happening in the East African community, and I'm very happy with what's happening in the East African community. We've got ECOWAS, which is also moving in the same direction. We've got SADC moving in the same direction. Once we break all these borders and we're able to share, I think one of our greatest challenges, we don't share, you know, because everybody is bringing something to the table. Once we break down these barriers, we're able to share. People can move freely, goods can move freely. It's going to change a lot because trade is going to go up. Tourism, which I believe is one of our greatest untapped assets, because we are doing roughly around 17% of our potential. And there's so much more. There's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of people who can get employed. There's a lot that needs to be done. But the first and most important thing is we have to brand Africa positively. Everybody wants to, I mean, look at China. China's a runaway success. They have issues, very major issues, but they are focusing on their strengths. And that's what we need to put out there. I mean, look at what's happening in the Tana Delta with the new agricultural project. Fantastic. You know, those are the things which we need to show the world. We need to talk about it and let people know we have the potential, in my opinion, to feed literally half of this world. And that is one of our greatest strong points. We don't have to wait for the minerals and all the oil and diamonds and all that. No, just on agriculture alone, that's a huge strength that we're not tapping in. And once we get that, I'm 100% sure we'll be smiling all the way to the bank.
Great. I'll now get back to Aloysius Atta, who is connecting to us from Ghana. Aloysius, if you can hear me, if, say, for instance, we talk about West Africa could be one of the regions across the African continent that are setting the example. I'll talk about countries like Nigeria that are having great innovations and are, you know, all out there with the way they are branding their country. But do you think that there are other African countries as well that can get to the level of Nigeria, despite the fact that we have varying natural resource wealth across the continent?
Yeah, I think, you know, they can. You know, I think anybody can achieve anything that they want to do if they set their mind to it and they make the necessary connection and talk to the right people. You know, one big challenge that we are facing in the continent is that we don't talk to each other. You know, we are corporate right now. For me, right now, I have more friends outside of Africa than inside Africa. And even the friends I have inside Africa, we don't talk to each other that often. And I think we have to start talking to each other, both the entrepreneurs and the business and the government, so that we can learn from each other. Because Africa, we have so many things in common. And one asset in one country can easily be taken and be replicated in other countries with a little adjustment. So I think it's very, very possible in other countries to make the same progress Nigeria and other West African countries are making.
Great. Well, we'll now invite you to actually send us your views, comments and opinion in regard to how best we can rebrand our African continent. We all come from different parts of Africa, from north down to south. Africa has got great potential. We've got a lot of wealth. You can talk about, you know, the negativities that are happening in South Sudan, but South Sudan has got a positive story to tell. And the same applies to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The same applies to the Central African Republic and all the other countries across the African continent. But others blame the way the rest of the world has treated Africa, inciting exploitation, going back to the slave trade and also the European colonial rule. They blame the Cold War rivalry for propping up greedy dictators in the first 30 years of African independence, and now they trace the continent's failures to date, exploitative trading relations, and two strict demands for economic reform from the International Monetary Fund as well as the World Bank. But remember, we are using the hashtag Rebranding Africa. Now let's hear from Jeremy Leibowitz, who is from Uganda and works with Parliament Watch that actually checks corruption in Uganda.
My name is Jeremy Leibowitz, and I live in Kampala, Uganda. To rebrand itself, Africa should rebrand itself as a continent of opportunity. There are many new opportunities being presented in the continent. Opportunities created by new technologies, opportunities created by natural resources, opportunities created by a growing and better educated population, opportunities created by increasing linkages with the rest of the world. But to fully take advantage of these opportunities, Africa needs to avoid the tags that have damaged its image in the past. The tags of conflict, the tags of corruption, and the tags of chaos. By presenting itself as a prosperous, growing, and stable place, Africa will be able to make its mark as a continent that presents the most opportunities for the next generations to come.
Well, thanks a lot, Jeremy. That is Jeremy telling how Africa can retell her story and just how we can rebrand Africa. Let's look at some of the tweets that are coming through the hashtag Rebranding Africa. We have one coming in from Ngugi Wamudhoni, who is saying, we have to tell our story. We have a beautiful story to tell, and we know ourselves better than the West and the East does. And we also have one that is coming in from Victor, who is saying, no continent beats the African continent. No continent is greater than the motherland Africa. Look at how sports such as soccer unite us. And Ngugi once again is saying we have to brand Africa positively. Let's focus on our strengths. We have the potential to feed half of the world, but how come this is not put out? And we also have one that is coming in from J. Debet, who is saying, in Africa, all we do is fight each other. If only we can unite for one cause, that is development, it will be great. Well, continue to send in your responses. The hashtags are right on your screen. And we'll now reconnect to Peter. Peter, many times we tend to overlook, or I could call it underlook, the potential of the labor force that we have in Africa. For instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, we've got about 133 unemployed youths, you know, in this part of Africa. But then the potential that we have is quite great. How do you think we can turn this around and brand Africa better?
Well, for lack of throwing stones, I'll blame it on parenting. You know, these things start right from the word go. How are we bringing up our children? Are we bringing up our children to see opportunities, or are we bringing up our children to have limited thinking? I kind of blame it on our kind of education systems, which are not designed to make people grow. They're not really designed to let people come out and express themselves, you know, come out there, be aggressive, and get go-getters. We need a generation of go-getters who are going to go out there and make a difference. And it starts with the parents. How are we raising our children? I think we're not raising our children right. We're not teaching them to be patriotic. A lot of children are being raised and being told to go out there, you know, and get a life out of Africa. Because the thinking is, when you go to Europe, when you go to the States, when you go to Australia, you're going to get a better life, and more so Asia nowadays. But when you look at what the Asians have done, it's very simple. They looked inside themselves. They focused a lot on education. They are really, really focusing on education and technology, which is something we need to do. And then we look at ourselves, at our internal resources. For example, on the issue of agriculture, I believe we need to move away from small-scale farming and start looking at producing large amounts. So the governments have to get involved. They have to get down, educate farmers, let them see the opportunity, help them find markets, especially abroad. And that, I believe, will be the first step to a great, great Africa.
Right. And say, for instance, if you were given the mandate to brand the African continent, starting with your home country, which is Uganda, where would you start, and what is it about Africa that you would want the entire world to know of? Like, if we were to prioritize, which would be your priorities in branding the African continent?
In the Ugandan context, I believe we need to just focus on our greatest asset. That is tourism. We've got great weather. I believe about the best weather in the world. I stand to be corrected. Great weather. I mean, we've got almost all the key wildlife. Uganda has about the largest collection of bird species in the world. It also has about the largest collection of butterfly species in the world. We need to start talking about this. Now, once we start building on that, work on infrastructure, okay, so that even in terms of tourism, people can be able to move, people can be able to access game parks, people can be able to access different tourist facilities. That will be the first step, and from there now we start building the brand. We start talking about ourselves, and these are initiatives that the government and the private sector have to both get involved, because also, you know, as a private sector, we cannot sit there and say, oh, I'm waiting for the government to come and sort us out. If they don't, then they're not going to do anything. People need to start getting together, forming unions like the hotel industry. What are we doing? Form unions that can go ahead and boost the industry, take advantage of exhibitions in Europe, in the US, in Australia, in Asia, because there's a lot of tourists who've got money to spend, who are looking for destinations, and that is the first thing. Because also one of the greatest things about tourists who have a good experience is they become your brand ambassadors. They go back and they talk about your country, they talk about the experience, and then once people get talking, the brand grows. I refer again to the Mandela brand. The Mandela brand just ran viral, you know, and it was not even because there was a PR machine which was pushing it, but people just started talking about it. So once we now get ourselves out there and we start engaging people, let people come to us, let them have a good experience, and then they'll go back and start speaking positively. We'll build brand ambassadors for ourselves.
Right. I'll now connect to Aloysius Atta from from Ghana. He's speaking to us from Accra. Aloysius, you are a youthful CEO who is actually playing a great role in technological innovation. But at the end of the day, we have a lot of youthful people from across Africa who are more of job seekers than they are job creators. But let's ignore that part for just 1 second. As a youthful Ghanaian and as a youthful African, if you were given the mandate to brand Africa, what would you do?
First of all, we have to do a very good job in communicating to this resource of the youth of the opportunities that we have, both in entrepreneurial world and also in businesses. And also we have to accept that it's not everybody that can be an entrepreneur. Some people are designed to be employees, but then we have to train this youth to let them understand that even when you become an employee or a job seeker, your knowledge of the African continent, how you understand your community, really matters. And you deserve, and based on that knowledge and your experience, it can get you a very, very high position in a very big company like Microsoft or Google when they are trying to open a branch in Africa. Mm-hmm. When it comes to entrepreneurship, we also have to be made to understand that anything that they want to do right now, they can do it because there's money and the resources. We have so many organizations like the World Bank and Infodesk, Indigo Trust, and all these guys are working so hard to support them. So all they have to do is to just find a niche and work hard towards that, and the resources shall be given to them. And once this happens, we will be having like so many youth seeing a very big opportunity. They are inspired, they want to get it, and they all stay focused. And when investors and outsiders see this, they tend to understand that Africa is now investable. You know, they don't treat you differently because you're a software developer from Africa. They treat you the same, just like any other software from Silicon Valley. And I think that this will go a long way to change the perception about what people have about Africa and also the African youth. But currently, if you are from Africa and you develop a software, and maybe you are very lucky to make it to San Francisco, we are treated very differently because nobody expects a software developer to come to Africa. Mm-hmm. They are inspired by that story, but they are not prepared to put money into you.
Right.
Because they can't see so many success stories, they can't see so many people like you coming from Africa. So to do a good job of communicating to our peers, there's opportunities there, and also empowering them to take advantage of this opportunity, then so many people's perception about the youth in Africa will change. Then they tend to see so many other CEOs, so many other young CEOs doing their own companies or working in high positions in this multinational companies.
Right. Well,
the perception of people about Africa.
Aloysius, I'm sorry, I just have to cut you short, but thank you so much for your contribution. I do appreciate that. That is Aloysius Atta from Accra, Ghana. And we also had Peter Igaga from Uganda, who is a branding expert, while Aloysius Atta is a CEO for Farmerline in Ghana. Now, thank you guys both for joining us on the show and also for sharing your views in regard to rebranding Africa. Remember that in case you always want to join our hangouts, you can always reach us on africaspeaks@standardmedia.co.ke. And next week we will be having yet another great discussion where we will be looking at the positive aspects of South Sudan. So do care to join us then, where we will be hosting the Deputy Ambassador from South Sudan. So care to join us next Saturday. I'll just wind up by reading some of the text messages, the tweets that are coming through the hashtag Rebrand Africa. Looking at some of them here as we wind up, Ngugi once again says the government and the private sector have to work together. And we have Jonah Okal, who is saying rebranding Africa needs us to be policy implementers for our policy and not for Western policies. Those are some of the so many tweets that are coming through the hashtag Rebranding Africa. But this conversation continues online. Thank you all for joining me on Africa Speaks. My name is Doreen Biira. My Twitter handle is actually Doreen Biira. So do care to join me then. I'll see you online, and until next Saturday, God bless.